Different books classify hormones in different ways, but one approach involves grouping hormones based on the type of organ or tissue that secretes them. A simpler classification relates to their molecular properties, like polarity, nonpolarity. Molecules such as water and glucose are polar, if you recall, while things like oxygen gas and carbon dioxide and lipids were nonpolar. Similarly, hormones can be polar or nonpolar. Polar hormones, such as modified amino acids like dopamine, or peptide hormones that are a whole bunch of amino acids strung together like insulin, those are soluble in water and they transport very easily in the blood. Nonpolar hormones, such as steroid hormones, are cholesterol based and they require proteins to circulate in the blood. This cholesterol molecule over here on the left is huge, and so is a cortisol molecule. Dopamine is an amino acid hormone, and it's quite small. And insulin actually is a pretty long peptide, reasonably speaking, but it is made on demand. Polar hormones, they dissolve easily in blood, right? Because blood is mostly water. And polar hormones, they don't need to move through they don't need help or chaperones to move through the bloodstream, right? What they can do is just be secreted into the blood and then they circulate and bind up to receptors on the outside of their target cells because they cannot cross the lipid rich membrane, which we'll talk about. But they circulate nice and freely and attach to their target cells. Nonpolar hormones do not mix well with water, and so in blood, they need help to travel. And they bind to transport proteins, which kind of act like shuttles carrying the hormones to their target cells. Um, Steroid hormones can cross the cell membrane and bind to receptors inside the cell, often in the cytoplasm, just circulating freely, or attached to an organelle like the nucleus. Transport proteins help nonpolar hormones stay soluble in blood, and that prevents clumping of these hormones. It also controls the release of these hormones to make sure that there's a steady supply instead of sudden surges. The transport hormones, they also extend the half life or the lifespan of the hormone by protecting it from being quickly broken down by enzymes that are in the plasma. And as you can see here, I've listed that the thyroid hormone has three important transport proteins. TBG, which is called, you ready? The thyroid binding globulin. Albumin, which we know is the protein that gives plasma its yellow color, and thyretin, which actually is capable of transporting more than just the thyroid hormone. Okay, so steroid hormones, such as cortisol, are really big, and they take time to be synthesized following a stimulus. They also last really long in the body. So, for example, a 5 day course of oral prednisone, which is basically synthetic cortisol, it's going to elevate your cortisol levels for like 30 days. Nonpolar hormones, like steroid hormones that are based on cholesterol, they can pass directly through the cell membrane. And then they bind to an intracellular receptor. And as I said, this could be free floating in the cytoplasm, like my picture here, or it could be bound to an organelle or the nucleus. Usually, when the hormone connects with this intracellular receptor, the receptor hormone complex then moves into the nucleus and affects a little piece of DNA to start producing the proteins for which it contains the recipe. So, hormones like testosterone and estrogen operate this way, activating genes for sexual maturity when these two hormones become accelerated in the body. On the other hand, polar hormones, they can't penetrate the cell membrane. And they bind to what is called an extracellular receptor. So this receptor, it activates something that's called a second messenger. And that second messenger is already inside the cell, and it's kind of waiting for the hormone to attach to the receptor. And this second messenger, when the hormone connects to the receptor, the second messenger triggers a cascade of reactions, leading to a bunch of cellular changes, actually. For instance, adrenaline or epinephrine, it's a polar hormone, and it causes really rapid effects like increased heart rate and faster breathing, but these effects are really short lived compared to nonpolar hormones because these polar hormones are actually broken down pretty quickly in the blood. They have a very short half life. The other thing about these hormones not only needing a second messenger is that the second messenger serves to amplify the signal within the cell. And what I mean is that one steroid hormone affecting to one receptor can actually turn on a whole bunch of different second messengers already inside the cell. Um, for all of these rules set forth here, about nonpolar and polar hormones. The thyroid hormone is a notable exception to all of this. Molecularly, the thyroid hormone is polar. However, it seems to behave like a nonpolar hormone. So it requires a transport protein for circulation and it requires an intracellular receptor. Now, the way that the thyroid hormone gets its message into the cell, whether it goes into the cell or whether it has second messengers, is actually a hotbed of research recently. We're still not sure. Um, there was a while there where we thought that the thyroid hormone was actively transported, so like using a pump, but I think that's still in play, but I don't think that's the primary theory anymore. Nowadays, we do think it's just passive transport.